Hello, this is Jen Lee. I am creator and host of I Need Blue podcast. I am also the author of Why I Survived, and I'm the proud guest today on Women in Podcasting.
Welcome to the Women in Podcasting Show. Enjoy inspiring stories, interesting interviews, and powerful strategies from women around the world. Jennifer Henczel spotlights today's top podcasters, new podcasters, and expert guests. Get tips for leveling up your life, gaining visibility, growing your business, monetizing your podcast, and so much more. We invite you to support women in finding their voice and sharing their passion. It's all about women empowering women.
Welcome, everyone, to the Women in Podcasting Show. My name is Jennifer Henczel, and I'm so excited to bring an amazing guest to you today, Jen Lee. We first met at PodFest in Florida, and what a thrill it was to meet you in person. And you have got to listen to this episode for Jen's amazing story. So, Jen, please introduce yourself and tell us a bit of your story.
Absolutely. So I'm Jen Lee, creator and host of the I Need Blue podcast, and I am a survivor of armed robbery and abduction. And that story is how I began my podcast. I am also a survivor of dating abuse, amongst other traumas that I go over in my book. But for time's sake, I'll stick with what I talk about in my podcast. So the event occurred when I was a store manager in retail. This was about a decade ago. And it was a Saturday night, 7 p.m. It was still light outside. The store was located in a strip center. So that means that there was like your big box stores, like a Target on one end and mini stores in between. And I share that because it was very busy. And I had about 7 customers. There was 9 of us total in the store, including children. And I was working in the fitting room area with the ladies, having a good time. And behind me, I hear, "Give me all your money." I remember I stopped, not quite registering those words because I'm used to hearing, "Does this look good? Can you zip me up?" Things like that. So I didn't initially turn around. And then again, I hear, "Give me all your money." And so at that point, I turn around and there's a masked man pointing a gun at me, close enough I could touch it. And I remember I looked at the gun, I looked in his eyes, and I looked at the gun. And at that point, I realized I need to move. And so I started to head towards the register area. I saw him wave the gun behind me for the other customers to follow, and they did. So I get to the register area and I give him the dollar bills from the first register. And I remember I did kind of like this Vanna White where I took my hand like this over the coins to see if he also wanted them, and he did not. I go over to the other register and I do the same thing that I just did. I'm noticing that the customers who are lined up to my right are starting, there's crying. There's a mom trying to console her children. I hear a gentleman praying who is then shushed by another customer because he was kind of loud. So I'm taking all of this in while also adhering to the robber's demands. He asked me, "Do you have a safe?" And I said, "No, we don't have a safe," and we did not. He inquired about a door that was behind me, and it was a swinging door that went to our back room, which is what I explained to him. And in that moment, I kind of had a feeling that that's where he was going to have us go next. And I had several thoughts going through my mind. Number one, there is a lot of people outside. He is still in the store. He has our money. What more does he want? Right? I had what I can best describe as like this out-of-body experience where I wasn't a mom or an aunt or a daughter or anything. I literally became like mama bear to these strangers. I had this ultimate need to protect that I have never felt in my life before. So feeling that need to protect, I moved, in other words, for all of the customers to go through that door first. I wanted to be last. So they walk through, I'm the caboose, if you will, and the robber stops me again and he says, "Where's your safe?" And I said, "We don't have one." And that concerned me because now I know he didn't believe me because he's asked me twice now. We make our way around the corner into the back room, the stock room, where my desk is, and we're all lined up in front of my desk. This dates my story a little bit, but he asked me to pull the landline out of the wall, and so I did. And then from there, he asked for our cell phones. I watched everybody give up their cell phones. I hadn't given him mine yet. He inquires about a newly constructed room that had been built back there. And that room was used for hangers and fixtures, things like that, that you need for a store. When he asked about that room, I knew that's where he was going to have us go next. And I knew when I turned to go into that room, you would see the outline of my cell phone in my pants. So I too gave up my phone. Now we all go into this room. Again, I went last. He is in there with us. And he points the gun at us and he says, "Don't say anything and nobody will get hurt." In the meantime, I still hear the crying, the praying. All my senses are like on system overload. And he asked me a very odd question about the door and how it shut or if it locked. I don't remember specifically what the question was, but I just remember it was very odd. So he again points the gun at us and says, "Don't say anything and nobody will get hurt." And at that point, he goes over to the door and he pulls it shut. And I remember the sound of scraping wood because that door had never been shut before. And so that is a sound that I will never forget. So now you have 9 people stuck in this room. And by law, that is where the abduction occurs. We are not allowed to leave. I look over at a lady, one of the customers, and she is starting to have a hard time breathing. And I go over to her and I remember I took her arms and I kind of pinned her up against the wall because I needed stability to hold her up. And I looked in her eyes and I was like, "Baby," I was like, "I need you to stay with me. I need you to stay with me." And I tried to get her to regulate her breathing along with mine to kind of calm her. It didn't work. Slowly, her body is starting to go down to the ground. I call over. There was a gentleman, a customer as well. I call him over. I was like, "I need your help. She's going to fall." We safely get her onto the ground and she is having a panic attack. As store manager, I'm trained to listen for the front doorbell when a customer either enters or exits. And as we get her to the ground, I hear that front doorbell. And so in my mind, I was like, "Okay, good. He left." Like, that's what I'm thinking, right? So now I'm back to the lady on the floor trying to assist her. Fortunately, my sales associate had her cell phone and she had tucked it away in her bra and she pulled it out. And I told her, I said, "I need you to go behind me and I need you to call 911 and I need you to then hang up and be fast." Because again, I heard a doorbell. I'm assuming he left, but really, I don't know what's going on outside that door. So she called, hung up, and I hear a doorbell again. Now I have 2 doorbells. And at the same time, this customer on the ground is now transitioning from a panic attack into a seizure. So like I know how to put a Band-Aid on, right? And I get asked, "Jen, how did you not panic?" And I will say in that moment is when panic started to set in me and I choked it down because watching somebody have a seizure, you feel so helpless. And so I looked at my sales associate. I said, "You need to give me your phone and I'm going to call 911." Because again, I've had 2 doorbells. If it is the robber and he pushes the door open, I want him to see me on the phone and not somebody else. So 911, they were great. And this is part of the reason my I Need Blue also focuses on our first responders, because that dispatcher, literally, they have a voice of a very frantic person trying to describe the situation in front of them. And then they have to like give directions. And that 911 dispatcher was amazing in helping me to just get that lady to where she was not going to get worse, right? I'm on the phone with her and the door pushes open. And I remember I had a moment of, oh my God, right? Thinking that it could very well be the robber. But the moment that we all realized it was law enforcement, like everybody took a breath. It was amazing. It was like, okay, we're safe. We're rescued. I remember the EMTs came in to assist the lady and get her the medical care that she needed. And I remember one of the officers looked at me and he was like, you are relatively calm for everything that just happened. And I said, just give me like an hour or two and I'm not going to be okay. And so that is pretty much how the story, that's the incident of the story. And then what happens afterwards, the trauma and going to court, that's a whole nother story in itself. But that is my story of surviving armed robbery and abduction.
Oh my goodness, what a story, and so many different levels to explore. So, you and I and Paul, my husband Paul, we all chatted about how storytelling has been really healing in his journey for telling his story. And he was able to use his story to take him from an injured mail worker to an international speaker. And you've really chosen the path yourself as well. We had to decisively choose to, when we were publicly speaking, to speak about positive aspects like the healing and the therapeutic effects of storytelling, telling your own story, people hearing that story and then wanting to tell their story, right? And so, and you've done the same, really staying positive, because people don't realize you're then sort of having to be a lawyer's assistant, with all the insurance and all this kind of stuff for years and years. We had that going on for years. So tell me a little bit about that, the how you've sort of used your story, explored storytelling as a healing modality almost, and how that's helped you over, progressing from the incident sort of through your restoration and what you're doing now.
Absolutely. Interestingly enough, I never really talked about the robbery. People knew it had occurred. It made the front news of the local town's paper and whatnot, but I just kind of closed myself off to it from having to go to court so many times and in front of a jury 3 times. It was so traumatic that I think I chose not to talk about it outside of when I was forced to go and testify or whatever it is that I needed to do. So for me, in all honesty, it was like the summer of 2020, and I just remember watching TV and watching a lot of things going on with our first responders and thinking to myself, I have a different story, like I have a different experience, and I know what it's like to call 911 and have them help you and have law enforcement show up and rescue you. And I was talking with my neighbor and he was like, you should do a podcast. And I was like, okay, so I don't even listen to podcasts. Like I knew it was like, you just talk, right? I was like, well, I can talk. So it was literally April, well, it was March when the idea came to my head. But April 1st, I went on Amazon, I bought my equipment. And from there, and this was 2021. And from there, it just evolved. I remember I put my hand on the refrigerator door one day and I opened it and it was like somebody smacked me in the head and was like, you need to do a podcast and tell your story. It is time. And I was like, okay. I walked into my husband's office. I said, well, I'm starting a podcast. He's like, okay, have fun. And so literally I remember saying to God, okay, I don't know where this is going to go, but I'm going. And it has been a journey that has led it has tentacles, and you probably understand that very much. And it's been amazing. And I had no idea the impact that I would have on people just from what they tell me about the courage I have to share my story. And you probably realize it, and Paul as well. When you speak, it could be months later and people reach out. It takes them a while to almost process their own whatever triggers that they felt during the moment. And then they realize, wow, I really need to say thank you. And then a lot of them are like, I want to share my story on your podcast now because you had the courage to do it. And I want to do it too. And it is, as you probably know, like the most fulfilling moment. Like I know I'm fulfilling my purpose simply by sharing my story. I don't ask God why I went through the things I went. through in my life because I know the answer. It brought me to where I am today.
Oh, that's so wonderful. So once you started telling your story, then things kind of shifted in a different direction where you go from that's something that happened to me to that's something I'm going to use to enrich other people's lives, right? And then so now that you've been telling your story, and what's so awesome is your story gets your foot in the door in certain situations to be on podcasts, to meet people you would have never met otherwise. But then you get to talk about other things too that are on your heart. So what are some of the things you cover on your podcast?
Oh, we cover all different types of things. So human trafficking, domestic violence, which in my book, like I stated earlier, I am a survivor of dating abuse. Fentanyl, that's a really big one that I've gotten heavily involved in. So you don't have to be, though, a survivor of violent crime. So when I say those things, give an example. Right now, the episode is Ari. He's a survivor of 9/11. He was in Tower One. Previous episode to that was a gentleman who was a triathlete and was in a car accident and ended up a quadriplegic. And joining us in the conversation is his son and daughter. And I am telling you, you will laugh, you will cry, you will feel inspired by this family. It is absolutely amazing. And now that I've started season 3, I really am like, I want to put even more of a positive spin on the stories and really focus on the healing, like you said, and just where you are today. And it's been really amazing.
Oh, that's so inspiring. And what we've found really impactful, and I'm sure you found this also, is that sometimes people get stuck in their story. And so when they see our example, and you as well, and I've seen people respond to your story this way, that you're showing from A to Z as far as, what happened, where you were at, and now where you're at now, and how you're changing lives, basically. And so that's so inspiring. And so now what's really exciting is you have turned this into a book. Tell me all about that.
I did. I have a copy right here too. So there's a visual. So this is my book, and it's called Why I Survived, how sharing my story helped me heal from dating abuse, armed robbery, abduction, and other forms of trauma. And yes, it just launched a couple of weeks ago. I have been talking since 2006 about writing a book, like many people, because that is when the dating abuse story ended, and I had started to write it. And then about 5 years ago, I decided to rip it all up. And I was like, well, this is prohibiting me from healing. So I thought if I just ripped up all these pages, that it would just all go away, right? All the trauma and emotions and everything. But it didn't quite work that way. And so now I've gone back into my memory and just really pulled what I can remember. I do it month by month. It's kind of crazy how much you still remember, right? So for me, my healing journey in regards to the dating abuse and being public about it has just started. So it's really interesting because I've pretty much healed myself, gone through the process of the armed robbery and abduction, but now I'm almost starting over to a certain degree by dealing with the dating abuse. I'm excited and nervous about it at the same time, but I put this book together and it ends on a very positive, inspiring story, so that others know that they're not alone. Not everybody wants to listen to a podcast. They like traditional forms of getting their information, like a book. And so I felt it was really important to take this and put it into print form.
Oh, that's so incredible. And this was just released. So I'm going to be ordering a copy also. And I'll put a link to your book in the show notes at womeninpodcasting.show. And so, Jen, do you have any closing thoughts or inspirations for people if they're, if they've been thinking about their own story, or maybe today they've started to think, well, I don't know if I have a story. Some people say that, well, I don't know if I have a story like you, because they haven't been like Paul crushed by thousands of pounds, or but like you, armed robbery. But like you said before, you don't need a really dramatic story. It's all about, where you were and what took you to the next level in any kind of process. There's all kinds of different things. So what kind of inspiring words do you have for people for sharing their story and their message?
Absolutely. So number one, I learned is don't compare your traumas. Your trauma is your trauma and it affected you the way that it affected you. So if you have a story, chances are you do, because that experience affected you in one way or another. So don't compare. That would be one of the first things that I would say. And I had to learn that myself. And then I end each episode by saying you are stronger than you think. And that is so true. And it doesn't have to be surviving armed robbery, abduction, or being crushed to recognize that you are strong. Being strong is defined, it's very individual. It's defined individually. For you, just coming out and saying, I might have a story, it might have taken you years just to get to the point that you could just say that one sentence. Don't underestimate yourself. You are stronger than you think. That is definitely one of my favorite sayings.
Oh, I love that so much. Jen Power.
That's right.
So these Jens, Jen Lee, Jen Henczel, we are changing the world one story at a time. So I want you to connect with Jen Lee, hear more about her story, get her book, and we'll have links to everything about Jen Lee in the show notes at womeninpodcasting.show. So thank you so much for being here and so bravely sharing your story today with us.
Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate every opportunity I have to speak it.
Bye for now.
Bye-bye.